This is Popular Front, a podcast focused on the niche details of modern warfare and underreported conflict with me, Jake Hanrahan. Today we're speaking to Professor Jacob Mundy, and we're going to be speaking to him about the resurgence of conflict in the autonomous regions of Western Sahara. You might not have heard of this, but a long frozen war reignited again in November between Western Sahara separatists of the Polisario Front and the government of Morocco. It's very interesting. If you like what we're doing here at Popular Front, please consider supporting us at patreon.com/popularfront. Before we go into the kind of history and why the Polisario Front have been fighting and the situation with Morocco and everything, maybe just tell us about the recent developments where Trump has come out and spoken about Morocco and they've acknowledged Israel, and what was that all about? What happened there?
Well, yeah, so an announcement was made late last week that Morocco would normalize relations with Israel, although Morocco already kind of had more advanced relations than some of its neighbors anyway. But and it appears to be a quid pro quo that the United States would recognize Moroccan sovereignty over the disputed territory of Western Sahara. And the Moroccans are sort of denying that it was a quid pro quo, but it's fairly clear that, and there was reporting on this in the months leading up to this for almost a year, that Morocco was kind of shopping around this idea that, if the U.S. would recognize its control over Western Sahara, it would do the normalization thing with Israel.
Right. And what is the situation with Western Sahara and the Polisario Front and all the history there? Maybe you can kind of go into the beginning of the conflict. Why did this all start however many years ago it was, decades ago now?
The Polisario Front, which is the leading independence movement. I mean, really kind of the only independence movement in Western Sahara. The conflict, at one level dates back to 1975, when Spain was about to basically hand the territory independence. Spain had originally colonized Western Sahara in 1885 as a part of the whole scramble for Africa, when European countries were gobbling up the last territory that were available. In North Africa, you had the collapse of the Ottoman Empire and all of that. So some of this had to do with discoveries of rich phosphate deposits there. There was an effort to kind of hold on to the colony of Western Sahara by rebranding it a province of Spain. So it would be like an overseas province like the Canary Islands. But the UN had recognized Western Sahara as a non-self-governing territory in the 1960s and 1963, really. And there was increasing pressure on Spain to get out of Western Sahara, because it was just becoming more and more absurd that there was this, Colorado or Great Britain-sized chunk of West Africa that was still under foreign domination. Spain finally announced in 1974 they were going to hold a referendum on independence. By that time, they had been under pressure from Polisario, which they had launched their military campaign to liberate Western Sahara in 1973. Having received some backing initially from Libya, though Algeria would later become their most important sponsor. So yeah, in 1975, things come to this kind of explosive point around, Spain is going to leave the territory, is going to, orchestrate a vote on independence. And really just, they already had plans to give the territory to Polish nationalist movement. Morocco, which had laid claim to large chunks of Northwest Africa, not just like Western Sahara, but like Western Algeria, Northern Mali, all of Mauritania. Morocco was still pursuing its territorial claim quite aggressively in international fora, and they had requested an opinion from the International Court of Justice. That opinion came out mid-October 1975, and it said there's really nothing there. There's no Moroccan historical claim that has any validity in Western Sahara. In the face of that, Morocco then threatened to march 350,000 Moroccan civilians into the Spanish-held colony until Spain relented, and there was a military threat behind this. That Morocco said, we're going to send these peaceful marchers down, but if you try to keep them from taking the territory, then we're going to use our military force. And Morocco had already for months been amassing troops at its southern border. So Spain, it was kind of a weird coincidence of different things. As soon as Morocco announces it's going to aggressively take Western Sahara, the dictator Franco collapses at the meeting where this is being discussed, and the Spanish government is in total crisis. But behind the scenes, the United States had gotten word that Morocco was going to invade Western Sahara, that the decision had been made by King Hassan of Morocco, and that one way or another this was going to happen. Officially, the U.S. pushed for like some kind of negotiated peaceful solution to the dispute, but behind the scenes, they really did want the King of Morocco to be able to get Western Sahara because it would benefit what was a very strong Cold War ally of the United States, France, and Britain. So they really saw, and this was really true, that regaining or annexing Western Sahara would help stabilize the Moroccan regime, which at the time was a very unstable regime. That the king had barely survived several coup attempts that sought to replace him and install a kind of military republic or something of that sort. So the October-November months where East Timor also gets taken over by Indonesia. But so this is the moment where the war really breaks out between Polisario and Morocco. And from then onward, for 16 years, you have open warfare between Polisario and Morocco. Polisario does quite well in terms of guerrilla warfare during the early years of the war. Mauritania, which had been a kind of junior partner of Morocco's in the invasion effort, is quickly kicked out. Algerian support is increasing, including some weaponry that proves quite useful, like surface-to-air missiles and things like that. Morocco is able to turn the tide in the war by building a series of barriers in the desert. So these are basically just walls that are dug out of the sand, and they're stuffed full of landmines. And there's a small base, I think almost like every 15 kilometers or so, to keep an eye on things, and the sophisticated surveillance equipment, things like that. So the advantage that Polisario had in terms of freedom of movement as a guerrilla organization is gradually restricted by this wall. And by the end of the war in the late 1980s, you have what is really kind of what's going on right now in terms of military situation, that Polisario is attacking the berm, the walls, but they're not able to really kind of gain and hold territory. So by the end of the war in the 1980s, it was Morocco was being harassed, but they certainly weren't going to lose the territory to Polisario. And meanwhile, the civilian populations are totally kind of outside of where the fighting is taking place. You have 40% of the population are refugees in Algeria since 1976, and then the rest are living under Moroccan occupation. The United Nations shows up in the mid-1980s to take over the peace effort from the Organization of African Unity. And the OAU, which today we call the African Union, had developed this plan that was pretty straightforward. It was a ceasefire, return of refugees, and a vote on independence. And that's what would be necessary to properly decolonize Western Sahara under international law. That is, that the population would at least get to choose between joining with Morocco or independence. Independence has to be some part of the solution, whether it's presented as an option or just granted outright. So Morocco and Polisario basically agreed to this framework through the UN. Ceasefire is arranged several months after the Security Council creates the UN mission for the referendum in Western Sahara. And then from then onwards, you kind of just have a peace process that just really kind of slowly deteriorates and unravels over the 30 years that followed. First, there was this effort to hold a referendum, but then it became clear in the wake of the disastrous referendum in East Timor in 1999 that the Security Council wasn't really comfortable with the idea that, what are we going to do if Morocco doesn't win the vote? Are we going to, sanction Morocco to get them to leave the territory? And that was almost unthinkable. So there's a switch around 2000, and this coincides with the new king coming to power that same year, well, mid-1999, really. And what the Security Council mandated was that the two parties had to, that is, Polisario and Morocco, had to negotiate basically what would be an agreement that they would both be willing to commit to. Because the original referendum idea, the issue there was like, is Morocco even going to, commit to recognizing a vote on independence? And really, since then, Morocco has often said repeatedly that independence is no longer on the table anyway. So what needs to be negotiated is Polisario rejects. And so, from 2000 to the present, the UN peace process has, chewed through 4 personal envoys of the Secretary General. The first was James Baker, who resigned, out of frustration in 2004. He was replaced by a sequence of others who certainly didn't have his political cachet. And so the peace process just seems to be kind of, this whimsical pursuit of a self-enforcing, self-implementing peace plan, because the Security Council really doesn't want to, do the heavy lifting necessary to resolve this conflict, especially when it comes to putting pressure on Morocco. So for years, frustrations have been building up, particularly Morocco's economic exploitation of Western Sahara, especially the fishing and the phosphates. And then recently, Morocco tried to improve the road that connects the occupied Western Sahara with Mauritania, which would allow even more goods and trade to go through. And this road is really the only paved road that you can think of connecting West Africa to Europe. All other routes through the Sahara right now are just too dangerous and don't have that kind of good infrastructure backing them. So Polisario red line at this infrastructural project of Morocco, and Morocco kept pushing forward with it. And then things just kind of exploded in October when Morocco said that it would violently remove some protesters, built. This also coincided with the annual Security Council resolution on Western Sahara. And this council didn't really do anything to confront these rising tensions. And so when Morocco removed the protesters in total violation of the ceasefire, them being on Polisario's side of the armistice line within a 5-kilometer buffer strip that, is a no-go zone for either side's military, that Polisario basically acted on their red line that they had drawn and said, if Morocco pushes into our sovereign territory, we're going to resume armed conflict. And that's exactly what they did. So that's where we were in mid-November. And then last week, we got this really stunning proclamation from President Trump.
Yeah. We'll talk about the current fighting in a minute, but I just want to go back to Western Sahara, Morocco. What is the difference here? Is this just a land dispute, or are they like 2 completely different cultures? I honestly don't know that much about the situation. Is it like, the people in Western Sahara, they're like kind of completely different culturally, they're separatists, or is it just like they want their bit of land and Morocco want theirs? What is the difference there?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about societies emerging in relationship to their culture that is firmly rooted in, pastoralism in the desert, like the Tuaregs or other sorts of Saharan peoples, the Western Saharans, if you're going to say who are they closest to in terms of ethnicity, cultural identity, it's Mauritanians. It's not Moroccans at all, and that familial ties, language, socio-environmental backgrounds. I mean, Mauritania and Western Sahara are much more alike in that respect. That Morocco is in one part. In the north, you have traditions of, plant agriculture, and in the mountains, you have different kinds of historical backgrounds going on there. So, yeah, the Sahrawis are definitely rooted in nomadic living, even though with the intensification of Spanish colonization in the 50s, 60s, early 1970s, there was a very rapid urbanization of the population within the growing cities that Spain was making. But yeah, the Sahrawis have a very distinct dialect of Arabic from Moroccan Arabic. Although in, let's say, the north of Western Sahara and the south of Morocco, you do have tribal overlap. And Morocco often uses that overlap as a kind of wedge to make these arguments that, we have Sahrawis in southern Morocco, and they have ties to the people of Western Sahara, so therefore the people of Western Sahara are Moroccan. But yeah, no, there is an element which I think this is very much about land, not just for the people of Western Sahara, but for Moroccans, that the the regaining of Western Sahara, as the Moroccans see it, is kind of a part of the national identity at this point. It not only is a huge part of what makes the monarchy legitimate to a certain extent, that they've in the face of all this international pressure, they took Western Sahara and they've held on to it. But just, again, the idea that Morocco before colonialism was much larger than it was after colonialism. And so there is also a feeling within Moroccans that this is a kind of justice for the ways in which French and Spanish imperialism dismembered the great Moroccan empire that existed before the 1800s or 1900s.
Right. And what is it like in the areas that the Polisario control? Because when you say Western Sahara, a lot of people are just going to think, oh, desert, like as if they're just, hanging out in the desert. Obviously, I know it's not that. What is it actually like in the areas that they control in the Western Sahara? And what kind of autonomy do they have? Are they completely autonomous from Morocco, or do they do dealings with them, or what?
Yeah, well, I mean, with that, Morocco's defensive wall that was built during the 1980s, it's more or less hermeneutically seals the Polisario-controlled Western Sahara, which is maybe, at most a fifth or a fourth of Western Sahara's total territory, with the rest being under Moroccan control. So the Polisario, what they call the liberated areas, or the parts of the territory that are under, their what they view as their sovereignty, there's really not a lot going on in those areas. There are scattered few settlements or buildings, things of that sort, often that were created very late in Spanish colonialism and things of that sort. The Sahrawis, especially those who are under Polisario control, tend to live in these refugee camps that have been created outside of the Algerian city of Tindouf. So at this point, there are basically 5 of these camps. There's 100 population count of about 174,000 of them. And they live more or less independently from Algeria. They kind of have their own autonomous space that they've carved out, where they've created their own, governing institutions and, what little economic activity there is, aid distribution, that sort of thing. So you can go to these refugee camps and hang out, get to know the people and things like that, as a guest of Polisario within Algerian territory. But there's not, the only real relations you have between, let's say, like Polisario and Morocco tend to happen at the diplomatic level. There is, of course, a lot of, let's say, other kinds of economic activities that happen in the Sahara Desert. So there is, to a certain extent, some leakage, you might call it, of goods and people across this military barrier, depending on who you pay off and that sort of thing. And it sometimes gets reported on in the the UN reports and things of that sort. But with all of the landmines and things like that, migrants tend to try to go, obviously through Libya. It's wide open at this point, or up through Algeria if they can make it, and that sort of thing. But yeah, so the western sort of, let's say, part of the Sahara Desert, because of this intensive mining that Morocco did in the territory, it just makes it really dangerous, even for basic nomads, because winds can often shift where mines are, and they can sometimes be hard to track. And so there's always an accident or two, every year where, a camel steps on a landmine or someone drives over it, things of that sort. All right. So that the intensive militarization of Western Sahara does put some limits on the kinds of stuff that happen there versus what you see in the more open spaces of the Sahara in Mali, Niger, Chad, things like that.
If you can just tell me a little bit about the Polisario Front. I understand they're the main militant group there. Like, who arms them? What kind of ideology do they have? They seem to be pretty well equipped from some of the videos I've seen. Like, I'm quite interested in them. Maybe tell us a bit about them.
Yeah, so the Polisario is formed in 1973 from some activists who'd been working together, mainly younger Sahrawis who ironically had gone to study on university campuses in Morocco. And so, being the milieu of the early 1970s, they encountered all the radical ideas and notions and things of that sort. As well as at that point, the movement to liberate Africa was in full swing, as well as new ideas about third worldism, third world liberation, things of that sort. And that seems to be sort of the original ideological thrust of Polisario. It was a kind of mix of a bit of leftism, but they were never embraced by the Soviet Union, who maintained much closer relations with Morocco, even though Algeria and the Soviet Union also had good relations, especially in terms of military arms and things of that sort, which we'll get to your question a little bit later. But yeah, so Polisario starts out by with these I guess you could say radicalized, but I'm not sure I'd say radicalized, but just these activists who decide that they're going to launch their own nationalist struggle. One that for them, it was, resonant with all the other struggles in the area, from Algeria to, you name it, South Africa. So the thing, though, is that in order to build a movement, they quickly learned, I think, that they had to take a much more, an approach that wasn't ideologically rigid, but could accommodate different kinds of tendencies and things of that sort. So as long as you were pro-independence, that was fine, and that you could accommodate older Sahrawis who had military experience, perhaps with the Spanish territorial police, things of that sort. The current president of Polisario is one of those types who had military training from Spain. And so when Polisario is founded, when they launch their war against Spain, they do have this very leftist guerrilla sort of veneer, but they've actually had very interesting relations around the world with conservative regimes, with Castro, you name it, that sort of thing, and it shows that they are very ideologically kind of flexible, in that one of their biggest supporters in the U.S. Congress right now is James Inhofe, who couldn't be more right wing. But they've also been supported by figures like Senator Kennedy. And so, as Polisario has evolved over time, they first of all had to create a kind of state in exile. That once Morocco invaded and Spain quit the territory, Polisario decided to pursue a strategy of trying to seek recognition as an independent, or I guess a state, albeit one that's occupied by Morocco. So the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic was created in 1976, and it's very closely related with Polisario right now. So it's hard to say, is Polisario a political party, or is it, what is it? But I tend to think of it as a national front that tends to, over time, it's gotten bigger in terms of the who's allowed to be in the tent, and they've had to accommodate different kinds of, from Islamist type tendencies all the way to, Hugo Chavez type tendencies. And that as Polisario has matured, originally they were sort of this program of like anti-tribalism, and that, people would only use their first names because family names were too tied to tribalism, and all that stuff is kind of like gone away. And that as Polisario has gotten older, they've also embraced, certain aspects of Sahrawi culture and tradition. In the 1990s, they even created a second sort of chamber within their state of exile, which is a council of like tribal elders, shuyukh. And so, Polisario has evolved over time, and but again, it's intimately connected to this state building project that they also have, the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic. Now, Algeria has definitely had a lot of influence on them. I mean, they borrowed ideas from lots of different kinds of nationalist struggles. Egypt under Nasser, Libya under Gaddafi, but once Algeria kind of like adopts Polisario as like a cause that they're going to support, and largely because Algeria was excluded from the process by which Spain left Western Sahara and Morocco gained it. So Algeria was utterly infuriated by all of this Western machinations happening behind its back. And Algeria decides that, it's going to support Polisario's diplomatic activities around the world. It's also going to support them militarily. Now, in the war in the 70s and 80s, Polisario, quickly learned that tanks and, heavy armor wasn't going to really work out for them. So, the Land Rover with no windows, so there's no glare, was, their chief sort of conveyance, light arms, things of that sort. The stuff that we've seen recently, these artilleries and missiles, things of that sort, it's difficult to say, but we assume that most of that is probably just some sort of excess defense articles gifted to them by Algeria, that in terms of like their most sophisticated weaponry, as I mentioned earlier, probably is, I'm speculating here a bit, but I assume they still do have some surface to air capability, like what they used in one really important battle during the war in the 1980s. But one wonders why there hasn't been a military response by Morocco since mid-November. And Morocco could be doing a kind of rope-a-dope strategy in terms of just taking the hits and letting Polisario use up whatever ammunition it has, and then kind of testing whether or not Algeria is actually going to be there for them when they need more artillery pieces and things like that. Or the other option is that Morocco is afraid to use its air power in Western Sahara because of the surface-to-air missile capability that Polisario has. A very relatively cheap missile could cause quite some damage to Morocco's very expensive air force.
And let's talk about the current conflict. So it kicked off in November. How serious was that? Like, what actually happened? I saw a few youth were kicking off in areas, and then there was, people literally fighting with small arms on the front line there. What actually happened? Like, how serious was it all?
So you had this border point that I was talking about, where Morocco was trying to, since 2017, has been trying to pave the road there in violation of the ceasefire and things like that. And Polisario's tried protesting, deploying troops in the area, later what they called police, and then more recently these civilian demonstrators. Morocco violently removed these demonstrators from the area, and that's exactly the point at which Polisario decided to resume its armed struggle. What we've seen, or at least what has been reported, is just bombardments, that Polisario is using artillery and missiles to attack these fixed Moroccan positions along the defensive wall. And the reporting it's very sketchy. We don't know Morocco's casualties. There are two that I know have been confirmed through sources in the UN mission. But one would think that, according to Polisario's daily press releases, that they would have actually had more casualties. We've also seen where Sahrawis are reporting that on Facebook groups for, let's say, Moroccan military families and stuff like that, they've been told, don't say anything if you've lost a loved one in the Western Sahara and things like that. So Morocco seems to be doing all it can to keep information from leaking out about what's actually happening on the ground. And because the fronts that we're talking about, where the fighting is taking place, are so far from any civilian areas, that we don't know what's going on. So it looks as if Polisario is just pounding Moroccan positions mainly with artillery day after day. Morocco hasn't responded in any forceful way. I mean, Morocco really hasn't even acknowledged that this is happening. And we don't know if Polisario is trying other tactics like night raids, which was one of their favorite techniques in the late 1980s, would be to sneak across the wall, to dig up a bunch of landmines, put them somewhere else where they would be run over by a Moroccan military vehicle, and then sneak back, that sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, it does raise questions about whether or not Polisario can actually escalate beyond this kind of just, we're just going to make life miserable for the Moroccans who have to man these bases on the front line. But in terms of taking, Moroccan positions, holding those Moroccan positions, pushing into the occupied Western Sahara, it's not clear that Polisario has that capability, or if they're holding back for some reason.
Right, and comparatively for the region, from what I understand, Morocco's military are like pretty well equipped. They're pretty tough, surely if they wanted to, they could just kind of move in, or is it not that simple?
Yeah, I mean, if Polisario, let's say, crossed the wall and tried to hold territory, this is what they learned in the 70s and 80s, that when they kept moving, they were quite effective as a guerrilla army. But when they tried to hold land, they would often lose it, because then Morocco can use heavy armor, air force, things like that. And so it's difficult for Polisario to shift the fronts in this battle. Now the question also becomes, what if Morocco decided that it wanted to push forward into Polisario held territory? What little there is of it, and there's some issues there. One is whether or not it would trigger an Algerian counter response, especially because you're getting so close to Algerian territory that it ends up being like one of these like Turkish Syria border things where the jets can't not fly over the other country's territory, right? Just to do basic sort of maneuvers and things like that. So the leaving a little bit of land that is technically under Polisario control might be strategically in Morocco's interest to avoid this kind of hot pursuit problem that they faced in the 70s and 80s. And that also includes Mauritania, but Mauritania is a very weak state with not a lot of military capacity to defend itself from, Moroccan incursion. Not that they would necessarily do that anyway, but yeah. So on paper, Morocco has quite an impressive array of military capacities. They recently just upgraded all of, not all, but many of they got the newest version of the F-16, the newest version of the Apache, and it looks like they're about to settle on a deal for some new drones with the United States. So Morocco seems to have the kinds of tools you would need if you wanted to at least use air power, but they haven't done it yet. So it raises questions as to why not.
Right, and how many members roughly does the Polisario Front have? Like, are they big, or is it kind of just a small guerrilla force?
The camp population is 173,000. If we assume that of that, half, are over 18, there's certainly a strong willingness among Polisario, among the Sahrawi refugees, to fight in the war. That they've gotten lots of requests to join the military, but the problem might be do they have the capacity to absorb all of that interest in joining the fight? And that's the big question. So figures I've seen suggest maybe 10,000 active fighters in Polisario. That number might be augmented right now with all of the people who are joining or calling up reserves, things of that sort. But yeah, we're not talking about a very large army.
Right, and they're mainly being armed by Algeria, it sounds like, right?
Yeah, the main supporter in terms of arms and funding of certain activities, international political activities, things like that, Algeria. But Polisario is supported by other countries. Often when they have an embassy, that embassy is supported by the country that agrees to host them, things of that sort. But yeah, Algeria is the number one supporter.
Right, and is there a big kind of problem then between Morocco and Algeria because of this? Because obviously they're right close to each other. I can't imagine it goes down very well for the Moroccans. Yeah,
well, Algeria and Morocco got off on a bad footing when they both became independent. Morocco first in 1956, Algeria in 1962 after a long bloody war with the French. Morocco immediately tried to invade Algeria to take the town of Tindouf, which Morocco had claimed as a part of this, this vision of a grand or greater Morocco that existed before colonialism. That invasion was countered by an Algerian invasion further north, and the OAU, Organization of African Unity, jumped in to mediate between them. And since they both had grabbed territory, they both just gave up what they had grabbed. But that kind of really got things off, kind of, I guess, set the tone for Moroccan-Algerian relations, which were very tense during different periods, particularly because Morocco kind of held out ratifying the border for a long time, using that as to leverage to get things from Algeria. And so when Algeria first encountered Polisario, and Polisario had tried to, use Algerian territory, they initially didn't want to cause problems, mainly first with Spain, which was Algeria's primary calculus. But again, when Morocco gained Western Sahara in 1975 from Spain through this, these sort of backroom deals, and, Henry Kissinger was lurking around and all that kind of stuff, that the Algerian government under Boumediene was just incensed that the map of North Africa had been redrawn without Algeria's position. And Algeria considered itself, especially in the 70s, because skyrocketing oil prices, Algeria was just becoming a very economically, military vibrant country, and viewed itself as kind of heir to Egypt's Nasser as the next leader of the Arab world, and things like that. So Algeria definitely wanted to see that Morocco didn't get Western Sahara, or didn't get it so easily, and that's when starting in really 1976, this just sort of unbridled support. Moroccans will often say that the Polisario is nothing more than kind of fabricated independence movement with no real basis in
from Algeria.
Sahrawi. Yeah, the Algeria just made the whole thing up, and uses it to just torment Morocco and that sort of thing. So Moroccans often deny that Western Sahara nationalism has any authentic existence, and that's certainly not the case. But it's also the case that a lot of Polisario's success, whether it was like on the battlefield in the 1980s or diplomatically, had a lot to do with this vigorous support that they were getting from Algeria.
Yeah, I mean, it's a weird comparison because obviously the Polisario are not as brutal and as ruthless as Turkey and Azerbaijan, but it does sound like that kind of thing between Algeria and the Western Sahara. It's like they're not the same, but they're backing each other up. It's a legitimate group, but it's also kind of, they're best pals, basically.
Yeah, and it's embedded within larger tensions between the two states. Not to say that there isn't, ethnic yearning for independence and things like that, but yeah, and then and then you have the even larger layer of sort of like geopolitical interests and things like that just make it. For a long time, we called Western Sahara the ultimate frozen conflict. Much like Nagorno-Karabakh. And to see them both kind of have these dramatic changes in recent weeks and months is quite shocking.
Yeah. And looking at the Western Sahara, it's mostly desert and what have you. Why is it that Morocco is so determined to kind of hold on to this fight? Why don't they just say, fuck it, have it? Like, we don't care, we're done with this. Why do they, what do they want? Yeah,
it's difficult to say it boils down to a material interest of that sort, unless you just consider land a material interest. A lot of people point to the fisheries, which are some of the richest in all of Africa off the coast of Western Sahara, and the fishing industry under Moroccan control has grown to become, the most important economic sector for the Moroccan economy in Western Sahara. But there's also phosphates, and Morocco is already one of the world's number one exporters of phosphates, and the deposits in Western Sahara are incredibly rich and relatively easy to mine. And it just gives Morocco this huge monopoly, like a one country monopoly, the Saudi Arabia of phosphates. So, people will say things like that. It's important for food. Industrial agriculture relies heavily upon phosphates, and it's one of the natural resources in the world that we're actually most concerned about in terms of whether or not we've reached peak use of phosphates. But I would argue that taking Western Sahara in 1975 had more to do with the Moroccan regime was just incredibly unstable at the time, and the king was becoming increasingly unpopular. He barely survived some coup attempts that I mentioned earlier. And so taking Western Sahara, I don't think was, there wasn't like an primary economic motivation or something of that sort. That it had a lot to do with the monarchy trying to figure out what can it do to, rally the nation and, give the military something to do.
Yeah.
Things of that sort. And it had an important effect because the Moroccan people were quite impressed that, Hassan appeared to go toe to toe with, a Western European country, Spain, and won, so, and a lot of people even think this is kind of surprising that, even if Spain wasn't yet, a NATO ally until after the transition to democracy, but that the U.S. clearly sided with Morocco in terms of getting Western Sahara. But, generally when you look at the world, of armed conflicts, the ones over territory tend to be the ones that are the most difficult to resolve, precisely because you can come up with ways to share the revenue and things of that sort, but the attachment to pieces of land within the imagination it's really powerful. And I honestly feel that Moroccans could probably imagine losing the monarchy and the world would be okay, but were they to lose Western Sahara, because that image of the country as united, when you look at Moroccan maps of Western Sahara and Morocco, and that image can never be changed for them, right? Even if they've never been to Western Sahara, they don't feel that they derive any material benefit from it. They're angry because of the subsidies that support all of the settlers there, and that sort of thing. But they still like losing the monarchy is much more thinkable than losing Western Sahara.
Right. It's it's not just goods then; it's also ego as well, kind of.
Yeah, political ego, you can maybe call it.
Yeah. In terms of religion, does that come into any of this at all? Because I know, in that region there has been various different kind of, religion-based disputes. Is that anything to do with this war for Western Sahara?
No, there's concerns that if the situation becomes more and more unstable, then the actors we've seen in the region, whether aligned with Al-Qaeda or the Islamic State, will, as they did in northern Mali in 2012, that they'll kind of jump into the vacuum and take advantage of the situation. Polisario is not it's not precisely a secular movement, but it's not exactly one that's where religion has been front and foremost. And some of this has to do with Sahrawi culture, which, like a lot of cultures in the Sahara, that the practice of Islam is much more individual than it is a group activity. So in Morocco proper in the north, or Algeria, or elsewhere in the Muslim world, going to the mosque on Friday or things like that is more of a that communal aspect to Islam, like that. But when you're a nomad in the desert, you just pray when you have to pray, and things like that. So only recently have they even begun building mosques in the refugee camps in Algeria. For the most part, big prayer days, like whether one of the two big feasts at the end of Ramadan or the end of the Hajj, that people would pray in a kind of outdoors, but that would be the closest thing you'd have to a mosque. Morocco has mobilized religion to a certain extent. The original Moroccan invasion of Western Sahara was called the Green March, which drew upon imagery and notions of from the Quran and the great battles of the Prophet Muhammad. Some of the Moroccan missions, or let's say initiatives during the war in Western Sahara, even used names from famous battles in the Quran and things like that. But really, it's not. Yeah, we haven't seen jihadi actors involved, though there's always been concerns. Some Spanish aid workers were actually kidnapped out of the refugee camps a few years ago, and the way that they get passed around and then eventually end up in the hands of the jihadi groups. It has happened on at least one occasion. But yeah, I mean, one of the things that was often keeping Polisario from resuming armed conflict was that they would be labeled an Islamic terrorist group or something of that sort. And I think it's an indication of like the frustration that they feel that they just, stopped caring about that label and have decided to go to war with, a country that is, that France and the United States consider their most important ally in North Africa.
Yeah, it's a big deal to do that. What I can't really get my head around is like, where is the Polisario Front based? Are they like in the refugee camps? Do they hide their weapons there like a conventional guerrilla force? Or are they more organized than that? Because from some of the images and footage I've seen, they look a little bit more regular than an irregular force, if you catch my drift.
Yeah, so the refugee camps are demilitarized to a certain degree. That they try to keep the not to hide weapons there or something of that sort. When the UN arrived in 1991 and the ceasefire was declared, there was Morocco and Polisario had to position their troops within basically easily monitorable places where the UN mission could, whether visiting by land or flying overhead by helicopter, could count and say, okay, there were 5 tanks yesterday, there were 5 tanks today. And I think when we see Polisario's capacity, especially they do these military parades and stuff like that, and it ends up in the press and you get some images, is that conventional capacity that Polisario has, that it's gotten from Algeria. So you get the light tanks and the artillery pieces and things of that sort. And that's kind of what, the UN mission was keeping its eye on for, since 1991 was, monitoring these various positions where Polisario had its weapons, its tanks, and its artillery pre-positioned. So that, like for example, the artillery will be, symbolically pointed away from the Moroccan wall, or something of that sort. And that was sort of the thing that happened since 1991 was just that, Polisario's military, apart from one incident where the Polisario did mobilize and almost went back to war in 2000, that other than that, Polisario's military has just been out in the parts of Western Sahara that they control. Now they do have training, they have underground bases that they've dug into the ground, things of that sort that take place as well. So I believe there's some military training that might happen in the camp, but as far as Polisario and its equipment, those are all forward positioned inside Western Sahara itself. So what happens in the refugee camps is you have a lot of administrative sort of stuff, not just like with aid, but some of the government functions and things of that sort. So there's an effort to have popular consultation on lots of different issues. So that's easiest to do inside the refugee camps, where people can have local assemblies and things like that. Symbolically, they'll often try to have big. Let's say every 3 years they have a big congress where the new leaders are elected or old leaders are kept in power. And those will sometimes be held inside what's called the liberated territories inside Western Sahara. But yeah, for the most part, like the day-to-day civilian activity of life under Polisario's Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, that all takes place in the refugee camps. The military stuff is, hundreds of kilometers away in the liberated Western Sahara.
Right, so they kind of mobilize when they need to, but they're always there, essentially.
Yeah.
Right, it's weird, it's interesting. It's kind of like semi-guerrilla, semi-regular. Do you know what I mean? It's quite interesting.
The thing is, you see Polisario, these military parades and things like that, and they're flashing their conventional capacity. And yet, during the 70s and 80s, they were most successful when they weren't using armored personnel carriers and things of that sort. 5 guys in a Land Rover, could take the day. But this image of this conventional military is definitely one that they present to the world. And so far, that seems to be what they've been using against Morocco, particularly in terms of just the daily bombardment that's going on.
Right. And as for the current conflict, the kind of flare-up in the conflict, what is going on? Do you think they're going to kind of come to some kind of peace, or they're going to tire each other out, or do you think it might get worse?
Yeah, well, until Morocco really joins the fray, it's hard to say that Morocco is, whether or not what's happening is really affecting them, or can they take the blows and kind of look like the good guy, at least insofar as, they're not the ones who are, bombarding the other side on a daily basis. And so then there's also a question of, is Algeria willing to continue to supply Polisario with artillery and rockets and things of that sort, or to even supply the kinds of weapons that might make it possible to overcome the ceasefire in some way, or not the ceasefire, but the kind of like the stalemate that's been on the ground really since the late 1980s in terms of the strategic environment. And I'm not sure Algeria is really in a position to want to do that, but they seem to be quite willing to continue to support Polisario, at least at this sort of limited level. Obviously, this gives the UN a lot to do in terms of trying to get both sides to return to the ceasefire, that being probably the primary thing that the UN Secretary General wants right now. But whether or not Polisario is really willing to listen, or is there, what could they, be offered that would, be face-saving enough to stop the war? Because the pressure on Polisario within the refugee camps to resume armed struggle has been growing year after year after year. I mean, the first time I went in 2003, this was like almost all you ever heard was, we should never have given up the military option. We're going to have to go back to it soon. And, war is an inevitable. We don't want war. It's inevitable, but this is what we're going to have to do, and so it's like 17 years later, it finally happens. So yeah, it's a big burden on Polisario to figure out, because what they're saying, at least on paper, is that this is an armed struggle to liberate the entire homeland. This isn't an armed struggle to resume face-to-face meetings with Morocco, right? This is the final battle, right? So they've really kind of presented this as, there's no going back from this point forward. But, unlike, Hezbollah, who, just made life living hell for the Israelis in southern Lebanon, I don't know if Polisario can do the same thing to Morocco, because that's really what, would have to happen is there would just have to be this level of harassment and losses and maybe some imagery would have to come out, because we're not seeing these battles. We're not seeing these Moroccan bases. I mean, maybe if we Google Earth, we can see some pockmarks and things like that where artillery's landed, but it's just a war. It's incredibly invisible right now.
Yeah, it is. It's really interesting. I get it. It's far away, but at the same time, there have been videos that have come out of like youth getting beaten up or youth, smashing Moroccan police cars. And there's also footage of the Polisario Front. There's that video where one of the guys is kind of firing into the air, calling everybody to fight. So there's some stuff getting out. And you said there that the Polisario Front are saying, oh, this is the final battle. Where are they saying this? Like, they have their own propaganda. I mean, what do they have? Telegram channels or leaflets, or like, how does it work out there?
Well, I just stick to the traditional stuff. So they have the Sahrawi Press Service, which is sort of like their state-run outlets. They have their own television that they run and things of that sort. Various actors in Polisario are active on Twitter, like their UN representative who, tweets out in 4 different languages and things like that. The declaration that came out when armed struggle was resumed, that's the one I'm referring to, from the Polisario president, who said this is the final struggle for the homeland. So yeah, the stuff that we do see is often comes from the parts of Western Sahara that are under Moroccan control, which again are very removed from the front where the fighting is actually taking place. Even in the 70s and 80s, the war for Western Sahara was an incredibly relatively clean war in terms of, civilian losses were almost unheard of unless, we're talking about human rights abuses or the hundreds of Sahrawis that Morocco, disappeared and still remain unaccounted for. But yeah, with the growth of social media and cell phone cameras and things like that, the day-to-day sort of harassment and beatings and, suppression of freedom of assembly inside the Moroccan-occupied Western Sahara, that comes out all the time now. Whereas, 20 years ago, we'd hear about it, but we'd never be able to see it because the Moroccan occupation is just one of the most tightly controlled police states one can imagine. But some brave activists have definitely helped bring attention to what's happening in the areas under Moroccan occupation. And yeah, we get some leakage from the Polisario side, with, like what you're mentioning with the rocket fire or the guy shooting in the air, or images of dozens of Sahrawis lining up to volunteer for the army.
Right. And what have the Moroccans been saying about this? Have they said anything in their press?
No, relatively very silent, almost as if it didn't happen. So, or it's not happening. In that, as I mentioned earlier, right, there's this effort to keep Moroccan military families quiet in terms of what's going on. Moroccans, I think, are generally kind of, one of the huge problems is just the way that the government controls the narrative. It's very difficult for Moroccans to have an independent opinion on the topic. That the few brave Moroccan journalists who do attempt to sort of look into things objectively or neutrally are often very much maltreated. There was a Moroccan journalist who went to the refugee camps, and he came back and he challenged the government's notion that these were concentration camps. He was like, no, these are just normal refugee camps. And, I walked around, I talked to people, and, I saw the truth. And then, and of course he's now living in exile. A decade ago, we had a few good Moroccan weekly magazines, but they often faced immense pressure from the government or advertisers if they ever questioned what was going on in Western Sahara. So, yeah, the Moroccan government is being very, very tight-lipped about this, and they generally tend to be when it comes to Western Sahara and things of that sort. I mean, the Moroccan government's also, denying that there was any quid pro quo with the recognition of Israel and Trump's recognition of Western Sahara, that these are two independent sort of agreements or something of that sort. Just, because Morocco is now, facing a lot of fury from its own Islamist movement, which politically the Islamist Party is one of the most powerful ones. But in terms of actual social movements, like the Moroccan Islamist movement is much larger and much more powerful than people give it credit for. But often that's because it's heavily surveilled and repressed by the Moroccan state. Right,
press freedom is not exactly high on their priority, as far as I'm aware, in Morocco.
Yeah, especially not in Western Sahara. I mean, just go to Reporters Without Borders and you see the litany of abuses that happen inside Western Sahara.
Okay. Is there anything else you think we should mention about this situation, mate? It's a very interesting kind of frozen and now, hot conflict again. I don't want to miss anything. So is there anything else you think we should mention?
Well, it'll be interesting that Trump has inadvertently forced a lot of countries to take sides on the issue, or at least to clarify where they stood. So if they didn't feel comfortable saying that the unfortunate truth that Morocco does not have sovereignty over Western Sahara, now they're having to come out and say that. So that could actually have an interesting effect on things because it raises the visibility of the issue, and that's always been a huge challenge. It's just that it's just on it because of whether it was because of the peace or that whatever abuses were happening inside the territory never amounted to anything that could compare to what else is going on in the world, that editors and producers just never really seemed interested in the issue. So it will be interesting if a new dynamic can be kind of catalyzed where people start to take interest in the issue. Why is Trump selling out a piece of the desert, for Israel, that sort of thing. So that could build new connections and things of that sort. On the ground, the thing that I would most curious to see is if Polisario is able and willing to escalate, like I said, to up the pain threshold, because it seems as if Morocco has so far weathered this pretty well. Again, only 2 casualties, but that might be off by several orders of magnitude, depending on how closely they're guarding the secret. But yeah, I would be looking for some kind of military escalation on the ground, because that's probably the only thing that will generate enough diplomatic pressure to get the Security Council to take the issue seriously.
Yeah, it's very interesting that Trump has just done this all of a sudden with the Israel situation. I guess we'll wait and see what happens. But yeah, he's really trying to like kick off everything from the table on his way out, I think. But anyway, that's Trump, I guess. Is there anything? Is there anywhere people can find your work and follow you and all of that? Make sure they keep up to date with all this.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter, Mundy Prof. And hopefully through me, you can find a lot of Sahrawis. I try to retweet, support their voices, things like that. Otherwise I'm just sort of, I guess where I aggregate like a lot of the stuff I produce.
Okay, mate. Thank you very much for that. Really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.
Cheers, man. And that's Mundy, like MUNDYPROF, right?
Yeah.
Okay, mate. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem.
That was Professor Jacob Mundy speaking about the reignited conflict in the Western Sahara between the Polisario Front and the Moroccan government. If you like what we're doing here at Popular Front, please do consider supporting us at patreon.com/popularfront. You get bonus episodes, access to the community Discord, narrated articles, discount on merchandise, all sorts. Patreon.com/popularfront. We do have a new t-shirt out on the shop. Go to popularfront.shop if you want to see that. It's called the Deeply Concerned t-shirt. We're kind of taking the piss out of the UN with it. The UN does a lot of great work, but at the same time, the UN does often nothing to stop its members committing war crimes and engaging in corruption. Most recently, a good example of that would be how the UN does nothing to stop Turkey doing what it's doing, and also how UNESCO has been taking bribes from Azerbaijan to kind of keep it quiet when Azerbaijan destroys Armenian structures and heritage sites. This was all proven in a recent document. And, UN has done nothing. The people are going to get away with it. Nothing's going to happen. So, I think it's only fair that we can kind of take the piss out of them sometimes. So, yeah, go to popularfront.shop and check out the UN is Deeply Concerned t-shirt. I think you'll like it. This episode is sponsored, as always, by Oracle Coffee Shop in Portland, Oregon, USA. Shout out to Frank. They're an independent coffee shop selling only fair trade products. See them at 3875 Southwest Bond Avenue 97239. Check them out. Ask, tell them Popular Front sent you. You might get a discount. I don't know. The episode is also sponsored by Grindcore House, a pair of independent coffee shops in Philadelphia, USA. One in South, one in West. Check them out on social media at Grindcore House. The episode is also sponsored by Propagandopolis, an outlet selling and informing people about historical conflict propaganda throughout the ages. Get prints at propagandopolis.com and use the code POPULARFRONT10 to get 10% off. Watch our documentaries, look us up on YouTube, youtube.com/popularfront. Our website with everything on there is www.popularfront.co. Our Instagram is instagram.com/popular.front. We have the most horrific, toxic comment section on the whole of Instagram, I reckon. Check us out if you want updates on conflict, but also maybe ignore the comments, or if you're sort of person who has time, argue with people in the comments. It's all up to you. We're also on Twitter, twitter.com/popularfrontco. And then if you're looking for me on social media, you want to tell me to go fuck myself or whatever it is, it's always at Jake_Hanrahan, HANRAHAN. Music in this episode, the intro was by Home. and the outro was by Sam Black. Listen to Sam's music at samblackpf.com. As I said at the start, thank you very much to the Patreons, specifically the higher tier. Those people are Bethany, Ketamemes and Sexual Themes, okay, Tina, Damien Boyd, Larson8669, Badnads, Bjorn Kirsten, Diamond Steen, Jacob, Michael O'Connor, Zach Packard, Todd Cravens, Will Anderson, Alexander, Nicholas Butter, Ron Swanson, JD, Jav, Ian Froese, James Cully, Michael Akakan, Ethan Reyes, I don't know, sorry about that, tell me if I said it wrong. Fitz Madrid, Joe Watt, Alex Northrup, Ed Coulthard, Johnny LaFleur, Hugo Newski, Mike Barone, Scott Hopton, Liam Williams, Chris Cusimano, Degenerate Zero Alpha, Jojo Arani, The R, Trey Nance, Charlie, Amy R, Rubicon, Mink, Frank Austin, Amelia Me, Nawazi, Christina Rivetti, Freya Northman, Ali Hunter, Moody Al-Rashid, Bill Wilson, Andrew Hurley, Vida Provost, Brian McLaughlin, Tom Lochran, Young Wasabi, Sarushe Hawazi, Tony Bin, Adam Bergsnyder, Sebastian from the Discord, Stephen Davila, Anthony Kabarik, Patrick Bronte, Dan Dunham, Fletcher Tate, Chad Walker, Diana Gorvanek, Q-Ball, Lawrence Abrahams, Peter McCormick from What Bitcoin Did, Emily Molly, Axel Iverson, Christopher Martin, Ryan Sandercock, Maurice Zumbwal, and Kay Hardy Roberts. Thank you all so much. Really appreciate the support. Without you, Popular Front would collapse, frankly. So thank you very much. Again, if you like what we're doing, please do consider supporting us. Go to patreon.com/popularfront. Or if you don't like Patreon, go to www.popularfront.co/support. And there's many different ways you can support us there. Donations, Bitcoin, all sorts. Check us out.